The coffee was still hot when it hit his face. Marcus Holloway felt the burn before he registered the motion. Scalding liquid traced down his temple, soaked into the collar of his shirt, dripped from his jaw onto worn leather. For 3 seconds, the world reduced to heat and shock. Then came the laughter. "Watch where you're going, you biker trash." The voice belonged to a man in a suit that cost more than Marcus's motorcycle. Expensive watch, polished shoes. Hair gelled back like he'd walked out of a magazine nobody read anymore. Devin Cartwright stood beside the booth with his phone still pressed to his ear, the empty cup dangling from his other hand like evidence he no longer needed. Ruby's diner went silent, the kind of silence that follows a slap or a confession. Forks stopped midway to mouths. The cook's spatula hovered over the griddle. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs. No, that might have been coincidence. Marcus stayed seated. He reached for the napkin dispenser with steady hands, pulled 3 squares, and wiped his face in slow, deliberate strokes. Coffee soaked into paper. The burn on his neck throbbed beneath his collar. He folded the napkins once, twice, set them on the counter beside his plate. Annie stood frozen behind the register, 19 years old, single mother working a double shift because the evening girl called in sick again. Her hand gripped the coffee pot so hard her knuckles went white. She looked at Marcus, then at Devin, then at the door like she was calculating how fast she could run. Devin returned to his phone call. "Yeah, I'm still here. Just had to deal with some trash blocking the aisle. Where were we? Right. The Jefferson property. Tell them 70% or we walk." Marcus slid off the stool, 52 years old, 6 feet tall, shoulders that still carried the frame of the Marine he'd been 3 decades ago. The leather vest hung loose over a faded thermal shirt. Patches covered the back. Iron Vow MC in bold letters. A small American flag near his shoulder. Another patch beneath it that read Vietnam, 1971-1973. He didn't look at Devin. Instead, he pulled a $20 bill from his wallet and placed it on the counter beside his unfinished eggs and toast. The meal cost $6. He smoothed the bill flat with 2 fingers, making sure Annie saw it. "Keep it," he said quietly. Annie's eyes were wet. "Marcus, He shook his head once. Not her fault. Not her fight. Devin laughed again as Marcus walked past. "What? You gonna cry? Go back to your gang, old man. This is a civilized establishment." Marcus stopped. He didn't turn around. His hand rested on the door handle, and for just a moment, everyone in the diner saw his fingers tighten until the knuckles went pale. Then he pushed the door open and stepped into the cold. October morning in Montana. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. Frost clung to the edges of the parking lot, and the sky hung low and gray like sheet metal. Marcus's Harley sat alone near the road. A 1978 shovelhead with more miles than most men would trust. He'd rebuilt the engine himself. Twice. He stood beside it for a long moment, one hand on the seat, the other touching the burn on his neck. The skin felt tight and raw. He closed his eyes and saw fire, heard screaming, smelled gasoline and burning canvas. Vietnam had a way of coming back when the body remembered pain. But this wasn't Vietnam. This was Route 9, outside a diner where he'd eaten breakfast every Thursday for 6 years. This was a man in a suit who thought throwing coffee made him powerful. Marcus pulled his phone from his jacket, flipped it open. The screen was cracked in one corner, but it worked. He scrolled through contacts until he found the name he needed. Tommy Reaper Donovan answered on the second ring. "You're calling early." "I need to talk to the club," Marcus said. There was a pause. Tommy had known Marcus long enough to hear what wasn't being said. "You hurt?" "No." "Someone else hurt?" "Not yet." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll make the calls. Clubhouse in an hour." Marcus closed the phone. He didn't start the bike yet. Instead, he turned and looked back through the diner window. Devin sat in the booth now, laughing into his phone, gesturing with his free hand like he was conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Annie stood at the counter, staring down at the $20 bill, her shoulders shaking in a way that might have been crying or might have been something else. Other patrons had returned to their meals, but their movements were cautious, like animals testing the air after a predator passes. An older man in a trucker's cap met Marcus's eyes through the glass and nodded once. Solidarity without words. Marcus swung his leg over the bike and settled into the seat. The leather was cold enough to feel through his jeans. He turned the key, and the engine coughed once before catching. The rumble was deep and steady, a sound that had comforted him through worse mornings than this. He sat there idling for a moment, letting the engine warm, watching his breath turn to fog in the cold air. The burn on his neck pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He touched it again, gently, then pulled on his gloves. Inside the diner, Devin stood and tossed a $10 bill on the table without counting it. He walked out adjusting his tie, still on the phone, still laughing. He didn't look at Marcus as he climbed into a black BMW parked 3 spaces down. Marcus watched him drive away, watched the taillights disappear around the bend in the highway. Then he pulled his phone out again and typed a single message to Tommy. "It's not about me. It's about what he represents." He hit send, pocketed the phone, and eased the throttle. The Harley rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel, then found the smooth pavement of the highway. The engine's growl deepened as he accelerated, leaning into the cold wind that cut through his jacket and made his eyes water. Behind him, 6 more motorcycles pulled into the diner's parking lot. Word traveled fast in the Iron Vow, faster than phones, faster than anger. Marcus didn't look back. He knew they were coming. He could hear the engines even over his own, a chorus of thunder building on the empty road. The Brotherhood didn't need an invitation. They just needed to know one of their own had been marked. The highway stretched ahead, gray and endless beneath the low sky. Marcus's hands were steady on the handlebars. His jaw was set. The burn on his neck had stopped throbbing and started to ache, the kind of ache that settles in and reminds you it's there with every breath. He thought about the look on Devin's face, the casual cruelty, the certainty that there would be no consequences. Men like Devin Cartwright had been pushing people around for as long as Marcus could remember. In the war, in the bars, in the courtrooms and boardrooms and every place where power gathered and decided who mattered. But not today. Today, the pushback would come from men in leather who knew what it meant to stand when everyone else walked away. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil and old coffee. Iron Vow MC had operated out of the same cinderblock building on the edge of town for 32 years. The walls were lined with photographs of men on motorcycles, some still riding, some long gone. A banner hung above the bar: protect, respect, reflect. 14 members sat around the scarred wooden table when Marcus walked in. They dropped whatever they were doing. Left jobs half finished, breakfast on the table, sleep unfinished. That was the code. When a brother called, you came. Tommy Donovan stood at the head of the table, 58 years old, gray beard down to his chest, arms covered in ink that told stories he didn't talk about anymore. He'd done 8 years in state prison for aggravated assault before finding the club. That was 23 years ago. He hadn't thrown a punch since. "Marcus," Tommy said, nodding toward an empty chair. Marcus sat. He'd cleaned up before coming, changed his shirt, but the burn on his neck was visible now, red and blistered in the shape of a coffee splash. A few of the men stared. Most looked away. Tommy waited until everyone settled. "Tell it." Marcus told it. Plain facts. No emotion. Devin Cartwright. Ruby's Diner. The coffee. The words. He left nothing out, but he didn't embellish either. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Axel spoke. 29, Iraq veteran, prosthetic left leg from the knee down. He wore shorts year-round so people could see it. Said he was done hiding things. "We going to pay him a visit?" "We're going to do more than visit," Tommy said. He turned to Bear, who sat at the far end with a laptop open. "What do we know?" Bear was 45, former journalist before the paper laid him off for refusing to kill a story about city council corruption. Now he rebuilt carburetors and ran background checks for the club. He pushed his glasses up and read from the screen. Devin Cartwright, 38 years old, runs Cartwright Development LLC, real estate, mostly commercial. He's bought up half the properties on Route 9 in the last 3 years, including Ruby's Diner. Carmela said. She was the only woman in the club, 38, former social worker who'd burned out after seeing too many kids fall through the cracks. She'd been riding with Iron Vow for 6 years. I looked it up after Marcus called. Devin bought the land 2 months ago. The diner's lease is up in 30 days. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Annie. She doesn't know yet, Carmela said. But yeah, when that lease ends, she's out of work. Bang kept reading. Devin's got a history. Expelled from college for a hazing incident his daddy covered up with a donation. DUI at 25 that got sealed. 3 harassment settlements from former employees, all under NDA. His father? Tommy asked. Senator Philip Cartwright, State Senate, 15 years. Money family, connected. Wrench whistled low. 51 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a shop accident nobody talked about. Best mechanic in the county. So we're picking a fight with someone who's got judges on speed dial? We're not picking a fight, Tommy said. We're finishing one he started. He stood and walked to the wall where the club's original charter hung in a frame. The document was yellowed with age, signed by 12 men in 1952, all of them Korean War veterans, who'd come home to a country that didn't know what to do with them. They'd formed the club as a way to keep each other alive and honest. Tommy read aloud from the charter, though everyone in the room had it memorized. We ride for those who cannot ride for themselves. We stand for those pushed down. We remember that power without honor is tyranny, and silence in the face of wrong is complicity. He turned back to the table. Devin Cartwright thinks throwing coffee makes him powerful. We're going to show him what power actually looks like. How? Marcus asked. Tommy smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. We're going to follow him, everywhere. We're going to be there when he wakes up and when he goes to sleep. We're going to document every word, every transaction, every person he steps on. And then we're going to make sure the whole town sees exactly who he is. That's it? Axel said. We just watch him? We watch him until he breaks, Tommy said. Men like Devin are used to invisible consequences. We're going to make consequences very, very visible. Carmela nodded. I'll reach out to the women who signed those NDAs, see if any of them are willing to talk now. Bear closed his laptop. I can have his social media history pulled by tonight. People always forget the internet doesn't forget. Tommy looked around the table. This isn't about revenge. It's about showing a man what respect looks like. We don't touch him. We don't threaten him. We just make sure he can't ignore what he's done. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief. Purpose. When do we start? Now, Tommy said. He placed both hands flat on the table. Everyone in favor of this ride, say aye. 14 voices answered as one. Tommy pulled the club's worn notebook from the shelf and opened it to a blank page. Every mission got documented. Every decision recorded. He wrote the date at the top, then below it. Operation Consequence. Target. Devin Cartwright. Objective. Accountability. He looked up. Axel, Wrench, Marcus. You're the first shift. Find him. Stay visible. Don't engage unless he does first. Bear, I want everything you can find on his business dealings by tonight. Carmela, see if Annie needs anything. The rest of you, be ready to ride when I call. Chairs scraped as men stood. There was no cheering, no fist pumping. This wasn't a party. It was work that needed doing. Marcus walked to the door, but Tommy caught his arm. You good for this? I'm good. You've been sober 14 years. I need to know this won't shake that. Marcus met his eyes. 14 years ago, you came to county lockup and told me I had a choice. Die drunk and alone or ride with men who'd hold me accountable. I'm still making that choice. Every day. Tommy studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if you feel it slipping, you call me, any hour. I will. Outside, the morning had warmed slightly. The frost was melting off the bikes, leaving wet streaks on chrome and steel. Marcus pulled on his helmet and swung onto his Harley. Axel and Wrench flanked him. Engines rumbling in harmony. Where we headed? Axel asked. Downtown, Marcus said. Bear said Devin's office is in that glass building near the courthouse. They rolled out in formation, 3 bikes moving as one unit. The road was mostly empty this time of morning. A few cars passed, drivers doing double takes at the sight of 3 heavily patched bikers riding with military precision. Marcus kept his speed exactly at the limit, signaled every turn. The club had rules about riding. You represented more than yourself. You represented every brother who'd worn the patch, living or dead. You rode clean, rode smart, and gave cops no excuse to pull you over. The burn on his neck had scabbed over. It itched beneath his collar, but he didn't scratch it. He let it ache. Let it remind him why they were doing this. They reached downtown 20 minutes later. The glass tower stood 8 stories tall, the only building in town that could claim that height. Cartwright Development LLC occupied the 3rd floor, according to the directory Bear had found. Marcus parked across the street in a public lot. Axel and Wrench pulled in beside him. They shut off their engines and waited. 15 minutes passed. Then Devin's black BMW pulled into the executive parking space out front. He climbed out wearing a different suit, same arrogance. Phone already pressed to his ear, gesturing as he talked. He didn't notice the 3 bikers watching from across the street. Or if he did, he didn't care. Marcus settled back against his seat and pulled out the thermos of coffee he'd brought. Real coffee, not the burnt stuff from the clubhouse. He poured a cup and held it, letting the warmth seep into his hands. "How long we staying?" Wrench asked. "Long as it takes," Marcus said. Devin noticed them at 11:30. He came out of the building carrying a leather briefcase, moving with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. The BMW chirped as he unlocked it remotely. Then he looked across the street and froze. 3 motorcycles, 3 men in leather vests, all of them staring directly at him. Marcus sat perfectly still on his Harley, arms crossed, face expressionless. The burn on his neck caught the midday sun, red and obvious. Axel leaned against his bike, prosthetic leg visible in shorts despite the October chill. Wrench stood with his damaged hand resting on his gas tank, the missing fingers impossible to miss. Devin stared for 5 seconds. Then he raised his middle finger, climbed into his car, and pulled out fast enough to leave rubber on the pavement. Marcus started his engine. Axel and Wrench followed suit. They waited until Devin reached the end of the block before pulling out behind him. The BMW headed north toward the expensive side of town. Devin drove 10 miles over the limit, weaving between lanes like he owned the road. The bikers stayed 3 car lengths back, maintaining perfect formation, never speeding, never breaking traffic laws. Devin turned into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant called the Meridian. White tablecloths visible through tall windows, valet parking. The kind of place where lunch cost more than most people's car payment. The bikers parked in the public spaces along the street. All 3 of them. Then 6 more arrived. Then 5 more after that. By the time Devin walked into the restaurant, 14 motorcycles lined the curb, and 14 men in iron vow patches sat at the outdoor tables surrounding the entrance. They ordered coffee, checked their phones, talked quietly among themselves. They didn't look at Devin through the window, but he could see them. Everyone could see them. A woman at a nearby table pulled out her phone and took a picture, posted it to Facebook with the caption, "Something going down at the Meridian." Then she went back to her salad, but she kept glancing at the bikers like she was watching a movie unfold in real time. Inside the restaurant, Devin tried to eat. He'd ordered the salmon, expensive wine, the usual performance of success. But his hands shook when he lifted his fork. Through the window, he could see Marcus sitting perfectly still, that burn mark on his neck like a brand. Devin pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. Roger Finch answered on the 3rd ring, voice smooth and practiced. "Devin, what can I do for you? There's bikers outside my location, a lot of them. They followed me from my office." A pause. "Are they threatening you?" "They're just sitting there, staring." "Are they on private property?" "No, public street." Another pause, longer this time. "Then they're not breaking any laws. Are you in danger?" "They threw coffee at one of them this morning." The pause stretched out until Devin realized Finch was choosing his words carefully. "You threw coffee at someone?" "It was an accident." "Devin," Finch's voice lost its smoothness. "Please tell me you didn't assault a member of a motorcycle club." "It wasn't assault. He bumped into me," I reacted, by throwing hot coffee in his face. It was barely warm. Through the phone, Devin heard papers rustling. "I'm looking at Montana assault statutes right now. If he files charges, you're looking at misdemeanor assault at minimum. If that burn is bad enough, it could be elevated." "He's not going to file charges." "No," Finch said slowly. "He's going to do exactly what he's doing. Make your life uncomfortable until you make it right. I'm not apologizing to trash." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Finch spoke again, his voice was colder. Then you're on your own. I don't represent people who create their own problems and refuse to solve them. Consider this my 30-day notice." The call ended. Devin sat staring at his phone. His salmon had gone cold. The wine tasted like vinegar. Through the window, more phones had come out. More pictures being taken. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk across the street, watching the bikers, watching the restaurant, sensing that something worth watching was happening. Devin stood abruptly, threw $200 bill, sun on the table, and walked out. He pushed through the door and headed straight for Marcus. "Is this supposed to scare me?" Devin's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'll call the cops." Marcus didn't stand, didn't even unfold his arms. "We're on public property, having coffee. That's legal." Tommy stood up from a nearby table. He was bigger up close, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of presence that came from years of being the man others looked to when decisions needed making. "You threw coffee on our brother. We'd like an apology." Devin laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I'll give you nothing. I own this town." "You own property," Tommy said quietly. "You don't own people." A phone flashed, then another. Devin realized half the outdoor seating area was recording this. His face went red. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Devin said. "My father is Senator Philip Cartwright. One call and I'll have every cop in the county down here." "Make the call," Marcus said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "We'll wait." Devin pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he dialed. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He called the non-emergency police line instead, explained the situation to the dispatcher, waited while she transferred him to an officer. "Sir, are they threatening you?" the officer asked. "They're harassing me." "Are they on private property?" "No, but they're following me." "In public spaces?" "Yes." The officer sighed. "If they're not threatening you and they're not trespassing, there's nothing we can do. You have the right to go about your business. They have the right to be in public spaces. Unless they break a law, my hands are tied." The call ended. Devin stood there holding his phone, watching 14 men watch him back. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They just waited. A reporter from the local news station pulled up in a van. She climbed out with a cameraman and started setting up on the sidewalk. Word had spread fast. Small towns were like that. Everyone knew everyone's business within an hour. Devin walked quickly to his car. The bikers stayed seated, but 14 engines started simultaneously. The sound rolled across the parking lot like distant thunder. Devin drove to his gym. The bikers followed. He parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where the executive fitness center overlooked downtown through floor-to-ceiling windows. He climbed on a treadmill and started running, trying to work off the adrenaline, the fear he wouldn't name. Through the windows, he could see the street below. 14 motorcycles had parked in front of the building. 14 men stood beside their bikes, arms crossed, waiting. Devin ran for 45 minutes. When he finally stopped, drenched in sweat, they were still there. He showered in the locker room, taking his time, hoping they'd get bored and leave. When he emerged 20 minutes later and looked out the window, there were more bikes. He counted 23. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Your 2 p.m. canceled." Said something about bad optics. Then another text from a business partner. "Saw the news. We should talk about distancing the firm from your personal issues." Then another from his father. "Call me. Now." Devin's hands were shaking again. He dialed his father's private number. Senator Philip Cartwright answered immediately. "What did you do?" "Nothing. I had an altercation with a biker this morning, and now they're harassing me." "An altercation?" "He bumped into me. I spilled coffee on him. It was minor." "Minor enough that you've got 24 bikers following you around town? Minor enough that it's trending on social media? I've had 3 calls from reporters in the last hour asking for comment. Dad, I need help. You need to fix this yourself. I'm not cleaning up another mess. You're 38 years old. Act like it." The line went dead. Devin sank onto the bench in the locker room. The walls felt like they were closing in. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, loud and irregular. When he finally left the gym, sunset was painting the sky orange and purple. The temperature had dropped. His breath fogged in the cold air. 23 motorcycles sat in perfect formation along the curb. 23 men in leather stood beside them. And at the front, sitting calmly on his worn Harley, was Marcus Holloway. The burn on his neck had darkened to an angry purple. Devin climbed into his BMW without looking at them. His hands slipped on the steering wheel, slick with sweat despite the cold. He drove home. They followed. All 23 of them. His house sat behind a gated community on the north edge of town. He pulled up to the security gate, typed in his code, and drove through. The gate closed behind him. The motorcycles stopped outside the gate. They didn't try to enter. They just parked in a line along the public street and shut off their engines. Devin parked in his driveway and walked to his front door on legs that felt unsteady. When he got inside, he went straight to the window and looked out. 23 bikers had settled in for the night. Some sat on their bikes, others leaned against them. A few had pulled out thermoses and were pouring coffee. They weren't leaving. Devin pulled his phone out and scrolled through social media. The hashtag #CoffeeGate was trending locally. Videos of the confrontation outside the restaurant had been viewed thousands of times. Comments flooded in. About time someone held him accountable. Those bikers are heroes. I went to school with Devin. He's always been a bully. Devin turned off his phone and closed the curtains, but he could still hear them out there. The occasional murmur of voices, the clink of metal on metal. The proof that he couldn't make this go away with money or connections or his father's name. For the first time in his adult life, Devin Cartwright realized he might actually face consequences. Devin didn't sleep. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds drifting through his closed windows. Low voices, the occasional laugh, the scrape of a boot on pavement. At 3 a.m, he got up and looked through a gap in the curtains. They'd brought lawn chairs, coolers. One of them had a small propane heater glowing orange in the darkness. They sat in clusters of 3 or 4, talking quietly, drinking coffee, waiting. The security lights from the gate illuminated their faces just enough to see they weren't angry. They were patient. That was somehow worse. Devin went back to bed but couldn't close his eyes. At 6, he gave up and made coffee. His hands shook as he poured, and he thought about Marcus's face when the hot liquid hit it. The way the older man had just sat there, wiped himself clean, left money on the counter like nothing had happened. Devin's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Channel 9 is running a story. You should see it. He turned on the television and found the local news. A reporter stood outside his gated community with the bikers visible in the background. What started as a confrontation at Ruby's Diner yesterday morning has escalated into a standoff here in the Meadowbrook community. Members of the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club have maintained a presence outside Devin Cartwright's home for over 12 hours now, and they say they're not leaving until they receive an apology. The camera cut to Tommy Donovan. He stood with his arms crossed, speaking directly to the lens. We're here because a man in power thought he could humiliate someone without consequence. We're showing him consequences. The reporter asked, is this legal? We're on public property. We're peaceful. We're exercising our right to assembly. Yes, it's legal. What would it take for you to leave? A public apology to Marcus Holloway and an end to the evictions Mr. Cartwright has planned for the businesses on Route 9. Devin turned off the television. His coffee had gone cold. He dumped it in the sink and paced his living room, trying to think of a way out that didn't involve backing down. At 7, he decided to go to work. Show them they couldn't control his life. He dressed in his best suit, the charcoal one that cost $3,000, put on the Rolex his father gave him when he made his first million, checked his hair in the mirror 3 times. When he opened his garage, 23 motorcycles started their engines in perfect unison. The drive downtown took 15 minutes. 23 bikes followed him the entire way, maintaining a precise distance, never speeding, never breaking formation. Other drivers pulled over to let the procession pass. Some took pictures. Some just stared. Devin parked in his reserved spot. The bikers parked across the street in the same places they'd occupied yesterday. Marcus sat at the front, that burn still visible on his neck, eyes calm and unwavering. Devin walked into his building, trying to project confidence. The receptionist looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Cartwright, there's a reporter waiting in your office." "I didn't schedule an interview. She said it was important. Something about Annie Morrison." Devin's stomach dropped. He took the elevator to the third floor and found a woman in her 30s sitting in his waiting area. She stood when she saw him. "Mr. Cartwright, I'm Jessica Chen from the Billings Gazette. I'm running a story about your property acquisitions on Route 9. I was hoping you could comment." "No comment," Devin said, unlocking his office door. "I spoke with Annie Morrison this morning. She's the waitress at Ruby's Diner. She said you own the property her diner operates on, and you're planning to terminate the lease next month. Is that accurate?" Devin turned. "That's a business decision, nothing personal. She's a single mother with a 2-year-old daughter. That diner is her only income. Did you consider that when you decided not to renew the lease?" "I don't have to justify business decisions to you." Jessica pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. It was Annie's Facebook page. She'd posted a video 2 hours ago. Devin could see it had been shared over 1,000 times already. In the video, Annie sat at her kitchen table, eyes red from crying. "My name is Annie Morrison. I'm 19 years old. I work at Ruby's Diner to support my daughter Emma. Yesterday, I watched Devin Cartwright throw hot coffee in a customer's face because the customer accidentally bumped his chair. Today, I found out Mr. Cartwright owns the building my diner operates in, and he's evicting us in 30 days. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to feed my daughter." The video ended. Jessica pocketed her phone. "Care to comment now?" Devin's face felt hot. "Get out of my office." "So that's a no comment on the eviction?" "Out, now." Jessica left, but Devin could see her on the street below 5 minutes later, interviewing the bikers. Tommy spoke to her for several minutes while the cameraman filmed. Marcus stood silent in the background, arms crossed, that burn mark like an accusation. Devin tried to work, opened his laptop, stared at spreadsheets that suddenly meant nothing. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, social media mentions, emails from business associates distancing themselves, a text from his tennis partner canceling their weekly game. At noon, he looked out his window. More motorcycles had arrived. He counted 37 now. And people had joined them. Regular people with signs. "We stand with Annie. Bullies don't belong here. Apologize." Devin's assistant knocked on his door. "Sir, you have several meeting cancellations, and the mayor's office called. She wants to speak with you." "Tell her I'm busy." She said it was urgent. Devin picked up his office phone and dialed Mayor Linda Hayes. She answered immediately. "Devin, we need to talk about the situation outside your home. It's harassment. I want them removed." "They're not breaking any laws. I've checked with the police chief. They're on public property. They're peaceful, and they have a right to be there. This is bad for business." "Your business or the town's business?" The mayor's voice hardened. "Because right now, every news station in Montana is covering this story. We're getting national attention. And it doesn't look good for any of us. What do you want me to do?" "Apologize. Make this right. Your father can't protect you from public opinion." Devin hung up without responding. He stood at his window watching the crowd grow. 50 people now. Then 70. A food truck had pulled up and was serving free coffee and sandwiches to the protesters. Someone had brought a speaker and was playing music. This wasn't going away. Devin left through the back entrance of his building, walked 3 blocks to where he'd parked a second car, an older sedan he kept for occasions when the BMW drew too much attention. He climbed in and started driving with no destination in mind. He ended up at his father's estate 40 minutes outside town. The senator's house sat on 200 acres of pristine Montana landscape, all of it bought with old money and political favors. His father met him at the door. Philip Cartwright was 68, silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy even when lying. He'd been in politics for 30 years and never lost an election. "You look terrible," Philip said. "Thanks, Dad." They walked to the study. Philip poured himself bourbon even though it was barely past noon. He didn't offer Devin any. "You've created a mess." Philip said. I reacted badly to a situation, that's all. You assaulted someone in public. Now you're being held accountable by a motorcycle club and half the town. Do you understand how this makes me look? This isn't about you. Philip laughed, cold and sharp. Everything you do is about me. Your name is Cartwright. That means something, or it used to, before you decided to throw coffee on a veteran. He's just a biker. He's a decorated Marine who served in Vietnam. I had my people pull his record, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He came home with PTSD and spent 20 years battling addiction before getting clean. And you threw hot coffee in his face because he bumped your chair. Devin felt something crack in his chest. I didn't know. You didn't care to know. That's worse. Philip set down his glass. I'm not going to fix this. You made it, you live with it. But let me give you some advice. Those bikers aren't going anywhere. The media attention is growing. Your business partners are abandoning you. You have two choices. Double down and lose everything, or swallow your pride and apologize. I can't just apologize. Why not? Because then I look weak. Philip studied him for a long moment. You know what actually looks weak? A man who can't admit when he's wrong. That's not strength, Devin. That's cowardice. Devin left without another word, drove back to town in silence, radio off, thinking about Marcus's face. That calm, weathered face that hadn't shown fear or anger, just patience. When Devin reached his office building, the crowd had grown to over 100 people. News vans from 3 different stations lined the street. And at the center of it all, Marcus Halloway sat on his motorcycle, waiting. Devin parked 2 blocks away and watched from a distance. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the videos being posted, hundreds of them now. People sharing stories about their own encounters with him. Employees he'd fired, tenants he'd evicted. A pattern of cruelty he'd never noticed because he'd never bothered to look. His phone buzzed with a new notification. Bear had posted a thread on the town's Facebook page, meticulously documenting every property Devin owned, every eviction notice he'd filed, every complaint lodged against him that had been dismissed. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was all public record. Devin sat in his car as the sun set, watching the crowd outside his building light candles. Someone had organized a vigil. For what? He wasn't sure. Justice, maybe. Or just the hope that someone powerful might finally be held accountable. He thought about calling his lawyer, but Roger had already quit. Thought about calling his father again, but Philip had made his position clear. Thought about running, but where would he go that the internet couldn't follow? For the first time in his life, Devin Cartwright had nowhere to hide. The third morning, Carmela organized a press conference at Ruby's diner. Tables had been pushed together in the center of the dining room. Annie sat in the middle, hands folded on the table, Emma sleeping in a carrier beside her chair. 3 other women sat with her, all former employees of Cartwright Development. Behind them, Marcus and Tommy stood with arms crossed, silent witnesses. Every news station in the state had sent reporters. Cameras lined the back wall. The diner was so packed that people stood outside looking through the windows. Carmela spoke first. She'd traded her leather vest for a simple black blazer, but her voice carried the same authority it always had. Thank you all for coming. These women have stories that need to be heard, stories that have been silenced by non-disclosure agreements and legal threats. But silence protects abusers. So today, we're breaking that silence. She gestured to the woman on Annie's right. This is Rebecca Chen. She worked as an administrative assistant for Devin Cartwright for 2 years. Rebecca was 31, thin, with dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept well in months. She leaned toward the microphone with shaking hands. I started at Cartwright Development right out of college. Good pay, benefits, everything looked legitimate. But within 3 months, Mr. Cartwright started making comments. About my appearance, about what I was wearing. He'd stand too close, touch my shoulder when he walked past my desk. I reported it to HR. They told me I was being too sensitive. Her voice cracked. She paused, took a breath, continued. It got worse. He'd text me late at night, asking what I was doing, if I had a boyfriend. Once he showed up at a bar where I was having drinks with friends and sat with us uninvited. When I finally told him I was uncomfortable, he fired me the next day, said I wasn't a good cultural fit. I signed an NDA in exchange for 3 months severance. I needed the money. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Rebecca wiped her eyes and sat back. The next woman introduced herself as Maria Santos, 28, former property manager. Her story was similar. Inappropriate comments, unwanted advances, termination when she rejected him, another NDA purchased with guilt money. The third woman, Patricia Owens, 42, had worked in accounting. She'd discovered discrepancies in how Devin reported property values for tax purposes. When she brought it to his attention, he told her to mind her business. When she persisted, she was fired and threatened with legal action if she spoke about what she'd found. Then Annie spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. I'm not a former employee. I'm just someone who works at a diner he owns the land under. Yesterday morning, I watched him throw hot coffee in Marcus's face because Marcus accidentally bumped his chair. It wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was cruelty. And I've seen him be cruel to others. To me when I'm too slow with his order, to the cook when his eggs aren't perfect. To anyone he thinks is beneath him. She looked directly at the cameras. In 30 days, he's evicting this diner. That means I lose my job. That means I can't feed my daughter. That means 12 other people who work here lose their income. And for what? So he can build condos nobody in this town can afford? Emma stirred in her carrier. Annie reached down and gently rocked it until the baby settled. I'm 19 years old, Annie continued. I'm trying to build a life for my daughter. And men like Devin Cartwright think they can just erase people like me because we don't matter to them. But we do matter. We all matter. The room was completely silent except for the click of camera shutters. Carmela stood again. We're not asking for revenge. We're asking for accountability. We're asking for an apology. And we're asking him to cancel the evictions that will destroy the livelihoods of working families. A reporter raised her hand. What happens if he refuses? Tawny spoke for the first time, voice low and measured. Then we stay. However long it takes. Another reporter. Isn't this harassment? No, Tommy said. This is consequence. There's a difference. The press conference lasted 40 minutes. By the time it ended, the video had been picked up by national news networks. The hashtag Justice for Annie was trending nationwide. Devin's name was being mentioned in the same breath as other powerful men who'd been exposed for abusing their positions. Bear sat in the clubhouse, monitoring social media on 3 laptops simultaneously. The reach was exponential now. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people sharing their own stories about being mistreated by employers, landlords, people with power who faced no consequences. He pulled up Devin's old social media posts. The ones from college and his 20s, before someone told him to clean up his image. Posts mocking poor people. Jokes about homeless veterans. A photo of him and his friends at a party with a caption that read, "Slumming it with the peasants tonight." Bear compiled everything into a single document and sent it to every news outlet covering the story. Then he posted it publicly with a simple caption, "Who Devin Cartwright really is." The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Devin sat in his office, watching his world collapse in real time. His phone had been ringing nonstop until he finally turned it off. His email inbox was flooded with messages ranging from angry to threatening. Someone had posted his home address online, and now people were showing up at his gated community with signs. His business partners had formally dissolved their relationships with him. His corporate bank had frozen his accounts, pending an investigation into Patricia's allegations about tax fraud. 3 former clients had filed lawsuits alleging breach of contract and misrepresentation. Everything he'd built was crumbling. He tried to leave through the building's parking garage, but reporters had found that entrance too. They swarmed his car, cameras pressed against the windows, shouting questions he couldn't hear over his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He reversed back into the garage and sat there in the dim fluorescent light, trying to breathe, trying to think of a way forward that didn't involve complete destruction. His phone buzzed despite being on silent. A text from an unknown number. "You can end this anytime. Just do the right thing. Tommy." Devin stared at the message. His hands were shaking again. He'd been shaking for 2 days straight now, a constant tremor he couldn't control. He thought about his father's words, about looking weak versus being weak, about cowardice disguised as strength. He thought about Marcus's face, that calm, patient face, The burn mark that was his fault, his cruelty made visible. He thought about Annie's daughter, sleeping peacefully while her mother begged for the chance to keep feeding her. Devin put his head on the steering wheel and, for the first time since he was a child, he cried. Not the polite tears of a funeral or a wedding, but deep, racking sobs that came from somewhere he'd kept locked and buried for decades. He cried for the man he'd become, for the people he'd hurt without noticing or caring, for the emptiness at the center of his expensive life. When the tears finally stopped, he sat up and looked at himself in the rearview mirror. His eyes were red and swollen, his perfect hair was disheveled, his $3,000 suit was wrinkled. He looked human for the first time in years. Devin pulled out his phone and typed a message to Tommy's number. I want to apologize, publicly. How do I do that? The response came within seconds. Come outside. Everyone's waiting. Devin's hands hovered over the door handle. This was it. The moment everything changed or everything ended. Probably both. He thought about running, about hiding, about calling his father one more time and begging for rescue. Then he thought about Marcus sitting on that motorcycle for 3 days straight, waiting with the patience of a man who'd survived worse things than an entitled businessman's tantrum. Devin opened the car door and stepped out into the garage. His legs felt weak, but they held him. He walked to the exit that led to the street, pushed open the door, and stepped into the late afternoon sun. The crowd had grown to over 200 people. They filled the street in front of his building, held back by police barriers that had been erected to manage the gathering. News cameras swiveled toward him. The murmur of conversation died into expectant silence. At the center of it all, Marcus Holloway sat on his worn Harley, exactly where he'd been for 72 hours. The burn on his neck had started to heal, but it was still visible. Still a reminder. Devin walked forward on unsteady legs. The crowd parted slightly, creating a path. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, could hear the click and whir of cameras documenting every step. He stopped 10 feet from Marcus, close enough to see the lines around the older man's eyes, the gray in his beard, the scars on his hands that spoke of a hard life lived honestly. I want to apologize, Devin said. His voice cracked on the last word. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. The silence stretched out, heavy with 3 days of accumulated consequence, until Devin realized that wanting to apologize wasn't enough. He would have to mean it. Devin stood in front of 200 witnesses and felt the weight of every choice he'd ever made. Marcus remained seated on his motorcycle, expression unreadable. Behind him, the other members of Iron Vow stood in formation, a wall of leather and patience. Tommy was there, Carmilla, Bear, Axel with his prosthetic leg, Wrench with his damaged hand. All of them silent, waiting. Devin opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He'd rehearsed speeches in boardrooms, delivered presentations to investors, argued with city councils. But standing here, trying to form words that actually meant something, his mind went blank. I don't know how to do this, he finally said. Marcus spoke for the first time in 3 days. His voice was quiet but carried across the silent crowd. Start with the truth. Devin nodded. His throat felt tight. I threw hot coffee in your face because you bumped my chair. It wasn't an accident. I was angry about a business call, and you were there, and I took it out on you. There's no excuse for that. There's no justification. I hurt you because I could. Because I was used to hurting people without consequences. He paused. The cameras were still rolling. The whole state was watching. Maybe the whole country by now. I've spent my whole life believing that money and power meant I didn't have to care about people I considered beneath me. Waitstaff, construction workers, tenants, employees. I treated them all like they were disposable, like they didn't matter. His voice was shaking now. He didn't try to hide it. I own the property that Ruby Steiner operates on. I was planning to evict them in 30 days so I could build luxury condos. I didn't think about Annie Morrison and her daughter. I didn't think about the 12 other people who would lose their jobs. I didn't think about them at all, because I've spent so long not thinking about anyone but myself. Annie stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Emma. The baby was awake now, looking around with wide eyes. Devin met Annie's gaze and had to look away. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke completely. I'm sorry to you, Marcus. I'm sorry to you, Annie. I'm sorry to Rebecca and Maria and Patricia and everyone else I've hurt by being a person who valued profit over people. Tommy stepped forward. Words are easy. What are you going to do? Devin pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. His hands shook as he unfolded it. This is the lease termination notice for Ruby's Diner. I'm voiding it. The diner can stay as long as they want. I'm also transferring ownership of the property to a cooperative owned by the employees. Fair market value. No tricks. He held out the document. Carmilla took it, examined it, then showed it to a lawyer who'd been standing nearby. The lawyer nodded confirmation. What else? Tommy asked. The eviction notices I've filed for the 12 families in the Riverside Trailer Park. I'm withdrawing all of them. Those families can stay. What else? Devin hadn't expected that question. What else do you want? I want you to understand what you've done. Really understand it. Tommy gestured to the crowd. Look at them. These are the people you've spent your life stepping on. They're here because they're tired of men like you acting like their lives don't matter. Devin looked. Really looked. He saw working people in coveralls and service uniforms, parents with children, elderly couples, veterans, people with calloused hands and tired eyes who'd probably worked harder in a day than he'd worked in a year. Tell them why you're here, Marcus said. Not why you came out of your building. Why you're really here. What brought you to this moment? Devin closed his eyes. The answer came from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd kept locked for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. I'm here because I'm empty, he said. I have money and property and a famous father, but I don't have anything that matters. I don't have friends. I don't have anyone who actually cares about me beyond what I can do for them. I spent 38 years building a life that looks successful but feels like nothing. He opened his eyes. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he didn't bother wiping them away. When I threw that coffee, I wasn't angry at you, Marcus. I was angry at myself, at the person I've become. And instead of dealing with that, I hurt you, because that's what I do. I hurt people because I'm too much of a coward to fix myself. The crowd was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped asking questions. Marcus stood up from his motorcycle. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood directly in front of Devin. The older man was 3 inches shorter, but somehow seemed larger, more solid, more real than Devin had ever felt in his own skin. You hurt me, Marcus said. You humiliated me in front of people I see every week. You made me feel small. But I felt worse pain. I survived worse humiliation. What I couldn't survive was watching you continue to hurt others who couldn't fight back. He pointed to his vest, to the patches that covered it. These patches represent something. They represent a choice to stand up when everyone else sits down, to protect people who can't protect themselves. To believe that how we treat the powerless defines who we really are. Devin nodded, unable to speak. You want forgiveness? Marcus asked. I can't give you that. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't a word. It's a process. It's earned through changed behavior over time. You want to make this right. Cancel those evictions. Transfer that property. Then prove you meant it by spending the next year, the next 5 years, the next decade being a different person. How? Devin's voice was barely a whisper. Start by listening. Stop talking and start listening to people who aren't like you. People who struggle. People who work 3 jobs to feed their kids. People who've been where you are and found their way to something better. Tommy stepped up beside Marcus. We're not asking you to become perfect. We're asking you to become human. To see other humans as humans, not obstacles or resources or inconveniences. Devin looked at Annie. I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I want to try to be better. I want to try to be someone who doesn't hurt people because it's easy. Annie shifted Emma to her other hip. She studied Devin for a long moment, and he saw something in her eyes that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't hate either. Maybe it was possibility. I hope you mean that, Annie said. Because if you do, maybe something good can come from all this pain. Bear stepped forward with a printed document. We need you to sign this. It's a pledge. You commit to fair business practices, transparent dealings, and regular audits. You agree to a community oversight board that reviews your major decisions. You give up the right to operate without accountability. Devin took the document. read through it. Every clause was designed to strip away the protections his money and name had always provided. It would make him vulnerable, exposed, subject to scrutiny from people he'd spent his life looking down on. He pulled a pen from his pocket and signed it without hesitation. Carmela took the document, witnessed it, and handed it to the lawyer. This is legally binding. You violate any of these terms, you'll face civil action and criminal investigation. I understand, Devin said. The crowd began to shift. Some people looked satisfied, others skeptical. A few were already leaving, the show apparently over, but most stayed, watching to see what would happen next. A woman pushed through the crowd. She was 70 if she was a day, wearing a faded coat and carrying a sign that read, "Dignity for All." She walked right up to Devin and looked him in the eye. "My grandson works construction. You fired him 3 years ago when he asked for proper safety equipment. He's got 3 kids. Nearly lost his house." Devin's stomach twisted. "I'm sorry. I don't remember." "Of course you don't remember. He was just a number to you. But I remember. His wife remembers. His kids remember the Christmas they almost didn't have because you decided his safety wasn't worth the cost." "I'm sorry," Devin said again, and realized how inadequate those words were. "Are you?" The woman's eyes were fierce. "Are you sorry enough to change, or are you just sorry you got caught?" Devin didn't have an answer, not one that would satisfy her. Not one that would satisfy anyone, including himself. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I want to change, I'm going to try. But I understand if that's not enough. I understand if nothing I do is ever enough to make up for the harm I've caused." The woman studied him. Then slowly she nodded. "Try hard, because people are watching now, and we don't forget." She walked away. Others came forward with their own stories. People he'd evicted, employees he'd fired, contractors he'd stiffed on payment. Each story was a weight added to his shoulders until he thought he might collapse under the burden of his own history. But he stood there and listened to every one. Marcus watched it all silently. When the last person had spoken and the crowd began to genuinely disperse, he walked back to his motorcycle, ran his hand along the worn seat like greeting an old friend. "Are we done here?" Axel asked Tommy. Tommy looked at Devin, who stood alone in the middle of the street, looking smaller than he had 3 days ago. "Yeah, we're done. For now." The Iron Vow members started their engines. The sound rolled through the street one last time, that deep rumble of chrome and steel and purpose. Then they rode away in formation, leaving behind a man who would have to figure out how to rebuild himself from rubble. Devin stood there until the sun set, and the crowd had entirely gone. Then he walked to his car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at his hands for a long time. 1 week after the public apology, Marcus returned to Ruby's diner. Thursday morning, same as always. Same seat at the counter. Same view of Route 9 through the window streaked with early frost. The jukebox played something old and familiar. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hung in the air like it always had. Annie approached with the pot, but this time she was smiling. Not the tired, anxious smile he'd seen before. Something genuine. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured, and Marcus noticed her hands were steady. No tremor. No fear that someone would snap at her for pouring too slow or too fast. "This one's on the house," Annie said. "Forever, actually. Tommy helped me set up the cooperative. We voted. You drink free here for life." Marcus shook his head. "Can't accept that. You don't get a choice. We took a vote. It was unanimous." She set the pot down and pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron. "We also wanted you to have this." Marcus unfolded it. It was a photograph of the diner staff, all 14 of them, standing in front of the building under a new sign. Ruby's Diner. Employee-owned since 2024. Annie stood in the center, holding Emma, who was reaching for the camera with chubby hands. "We're going to hang it on the wall," Annie said, "right next to the old photos. So people remember that sometimes things can change, that people can stand up and win." Marcus studied the photograph. These were people who'd almost lost everything because one man decided their livelihoods didn't matter. Now they owned their future. Not perfectly, not without struggle still ahead, but they owned it. "Thank you for standing with us," Annie said quietly. "Wasn't just me, was the whole club. Still, you were the one who got hurt. You could have just let it go." Marcus folded the photo carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Letting it go would have meant he'd do it to someone else, someone who maybe couldn't stand up. That's not how it works in my world. The door chimed and a family entered. Parents and 3 kids, the youngest maybe 5 years old. They slid into a booth, and the kids immediately pressed their faces against the window, pointing at something outside. Marcus followed their gaze and saw his Harley parked at the curb. The morning sun caught the chrome and made it shine like water. "Cool motorcycle," the oldest kid said loudly. "Dad, can we get a motorcycle?" The father laughed. "Ask your mother." A mother gave him a look that said absolutely not, and the whole diner smiled at the familiar dance of family negotiation. Marcus drank his coffee and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of seeing something broken made right. His phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. "Clubhouse meeting tonight. New situation. Veteran being denied benefits." Marcus typed back, "I'll be there." The work never stopped. There was always another fight, another injustice, another person who needed someone to stand with them. That was the code. That was the choice they'd all made when they put on the patch. He finished his coffee and stood. Left a 20 on the counter despite Annie's protest. Walked out into the cold morning, where his breath turned to fog and his bike waited patient as always. Before he could reach it, a car pulled into the parking lot. Not just any car. Devin Cartwright's black BMW. Marcus stopped walking. His hand instinctively moved to his pocket where his phone was, ready to call Tommy if this went wrong. But Devin got out of the car alone. No lawyer, no bodyguards. Just a man in jeans and a simple jacket that probably cost less than his usual wardrobe. "Marcus," Devin said. He stood by his car like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come closer. "Devin, I don't want to bother you. I just wanted to say something." Marcus waited. The burn on his neck had faded to a pink scar now, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. "I've spent the last week meeting with everyone I hurt," Devin said. "All the people who spoke at that press conference, the families I evicted, the employees I fired. Some of them accepted my apology, most didn't. I don't blame them. That why you're here? Looking for acceptance?" "No." Devin took a breath. "I'm here because I wanted you to know I'm starting therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind where you pay someone to tell you you're fine. The kind where they tell you what's broken and help you fix it." Marcus nodded slowly. "And I'm selling my company," Devin continued. "Not because I have to. Because I realized I built it on hurting people, and I don't want that anymore. I'm going to work with a nonprofit instead. Housing advocacy. Helping people fight wrongful evictions." "That's good," Marcus said. "But you know it doesn't erase what you did." "I know. My therapist keeps telling me that redemption isn't a destination. It's a direction. You keep moving toward being better, and maybe eventually you get somewhere worth being." Marcus studied him. Devin looked different. Smaller somehow, but more solid. Like he'd lost some inflation and gained some weight at the same time. His eyes met Marcus's directly now, instead of sliding past like before. "Why are you really here?" Marcus asked. Devin hesitated. "I wanted to ask if maybe, sometime, when you think it's appropriate, I could volunteer with your club. Whatever you need. Cleaning the clubhouse, running errands, anything. I need to learn how to be around people who actually do good instead of just talking about it." Marcus felt Tommy's words echo in his head. Forgiveness isn't a word, it's a process. "That's not my call to make," Marcus said. "That's Tommy's decision. He runs the club. Could you ask him? I can mention it, but don't expect anything. We've seen a lot of people promise to change. Most of them don't follow through." "I understand." Devin turned to leave, then stopped. "The burn. How bad was it?" Marcus touched his neck reflexively. "Second degree, healed clean. I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I'm going to keep saying it until it stops feeling inadequate." "It's always going to feel inadequate," Marcus said. "That's how you know you actually mean it." Devin nodded and got back in his car. Marcus watched him drive away, then climbed on his Harley and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Change was possible. He'd lived that truth himself. 14 years ago, he'd been a drunk in county lockup with no future and no hope. Tommy had given him a chance. The club had held him accountable. He'd rebuilt himself one day at a time until he became someone he could recognize in the mirror. Maybe Devin could do the same. Maybe not. Time would tell. Marcus started the engine and pulled onto Route 9. The road stretched ahead, empty and clean in the morning light. He had work to do at the shop, bills to pay, a life that was simple and honest and his own. That evening, he rode to the clubhouse. The lot was full of motorcycles, brothers gathering for the weekly meeting. Inside, Tommy stood at the table, reviewing a case file about a veteran who'd been denied disability benefits after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. "What do we know?" Tommy asked as everyone settled. Bear pulled up information on his laptop. Axel shared stories from veteran networks. Carmela contacted local advocacy groups. The club moved like a machine, built from individual parts that knew their purpose. Marcus listened and contributed when he had something to add. This was his family. Not the one he'd been born into, but the one he'd chosen and been chosen by. Men and women who'd all been broken at some point and put themselves back together with scar tissue and stubbornness. At the end of the meeting, Marcus mentioned Devin's request to volunteer. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "What do you think?" "I think he's trying. Can't say if he'll follow through." "You trust him?" Marcus considered. Trust was earned slowly and lost quickly. Devin had a long way to go before anyone could trust him with anything that mattered. "No," Marcus said, "but I didn't trust myself 14 years ago either." Tommy nodded. "Fair enough. Tell him he can start by cleaning the bathrooms every Saturday for the next 6 months. No patch, no privileges, no shortcuts. If he's still showing up after that, we'll talk about what comes next. I'll let him know." The meeting ended, and brothers filtered out to their bikes. Marcus stayed behind to help Tommy lock up. They worked in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd known each other long enough that words weren't always necessary. "You did good," Tommy said, as they walked outside. "With all this, you could have let your anger take over. You didn't. Learned from the best. Don't give me too much credit. I'm still figuring it out, same as everyone else." They stood in the parking lot, under stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and their breath made clouds in the cold air. "You think he'll actually change?" Tommy asked. "Devin?" Marcus shrugged. "I think he's got a chance. Same chance any of us get. The question is whether he takes it or throws it away. And if he throws it away, then we tried. That's all anyone can do. Give people a chance and see what they do with it." Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "Go home, get some rest. We ride Saturday for the veteran case." Marcus nodded and climbed on his Harley. The engine started smooth and steady, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. He rode through town slowly, watching the lights come on in windows, families settling in for the evening, the ordinary rhythms of life continuing the way they always had. He passed Ruby's diner and saw it was still busy despite the late hour. The new sign glowed under T. He's streetlights, a marker of something good that had come from something bad. That was how it worked sometimes. You took the broken pieces and built something new. You took the pain and transformed it into purpose. You took the anger and shaped it into accountability. Marcus rode home to his small apartment above the repair shop, parked his bike and stood there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Tomorrow he'd work on Mrs. Henderson's Kawasaki and finish rebuilding the carburetor on Jake's Triumph. Regular work, honest work. But tonight, he'd sleep knowing that somewhere a diner was still open and a single mother could feed her daughter, and a man who'd never faced consequences was finally learning what accountability felt like. It wasn't justice in the dramatic sense. No one going to prison, no one losing everything. Just a small correction in the universe. A push back against cruelty. A reminder that power without honor was tyranny, and silence in the face of wrong was complicity. That was enough. 6 months changed everything and nothing at all. Winter had given way to spring in Montana. Snow melted off the mountains and filled the rivers. Wildflowers pushed through the last frozen ground along Route 9. The air smelled like pine and wet earth and possibilities. Marcus pulled into Ruby's diner on a Thursday morning in April. Same as he'd done every week for 7 years now. His Harley's engine had a new sound to it after the rebuild wrench had helped him finish. Smoother, stronger, ready for another 100,000 miles. Inside, the diner had changed in small ways. New paint on the walls, bright yellow that caught the morning sun. Photographs lined one side, showing the history of the place, including the one Annie had given Marcus months ago. A chalkboard near the register listed daily specials in neat handwriting, and at the bottom it read, "Employee-owned, community-supported, everyone welcome." Annie was training a new waitress, a girl maybe 17, with nervous hands and careful steps. Annie moved beside her with patience, showing her how to balance plates, how to pour coffee without spilling, how to smile at customers even when your feet hurt and you're tired. When Annie saw Marcus, she held up one finger. Finished the training moment, then came over with the coffee pot. "You're late today," she said, pouring without asking. "Transmission job ran long. Emma's been asking about you. She calls you Motorcycle Man. Wants to know when you're going to give her a ride." Marcus smiled. "Tell her when she's 18 and her mama gives permission." That's what I told her. She was not pleased. Annie set down the pot and pulled out her order pad out of habit, even though she already knew what Marcus would order. "The usual? Please." She turned to put in the order, then stopped. "Devin's here, in the back booth. Wanted you to know in case that makes you uncomfortable." Marcus looked toward the back. Devin sat alone, reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He'd lost weight. His hair was longer, less styled. He wore work boots and jeans with actual dirt on them. "It's fine," Marcus said. Annie nodded and headed to the kitchen. Marcus drank his coffee and watched the morning traffic pass outside. Trucks heading to work sites, parents driving kids to school. The ordinary machinery of a day beginning. After a few minutes, Devin stood and walked over. He didn't sit down, just stood beside the counter, holding his coffee cup. "Morning," Devin said. "Morning. I finished the bathrooms at the clubhouse. Tommy said they passed inspection." Marcus had heard. Tommy had called it the cleanest those bathrooms had been in 30 years. Devin had shown up every Saturday at dawn for 6 months, scrubbed toilets and mopped floors and never complained once. "What's next?" Devin asked. "That's Tommy's call, not mine." "Right, sorry. I just thought maybe you'd heard something." Marcus turned to look at him properly. Devin met his eyes without flinching. That was new. 6 months ago, the man couldn't hold eye contact for more than a second. "I heard you're working at the housing advocacy nonprofit now," Marcus said. "Yeah, started 3 months ago. Mostly filing and phone calls. Learning how eviction defense actually works from the other side." "How's that going?" Devin's jaw tightened. "It's hard, seeing how many people lose their homes because landlords know they can't afford lawyers. Knowing I used to be one of those landlords. But I'm learning, trying to help." Annie brought Marcus's breakfast, eggs and toast, same as always. She gave Devin a look that wasn't quite friendly, but wasn't hostile either. Progress measured in small increments. "You eating?" she asked Devin. "I already did, thanks." She nodded and moved to check on other customers. Devin stood there for another moment like he wanted to say something else, then apparently thought better of it and returned to his booth. Marcus ate slowly, tasting the food, feeling the warmth of the coffee. Present in the moment the way his therapist had taught him years ago. Mindfulness, she'd called it. Being here instead of lost in Vietnam or drunk or anywhere else his mind tried to drag him. The door opened and Tommy walked in, followed by Carmela and Bear. They spotted Marcus and headed over. "You're here early," Marcus said. "Couldn't sleep," Tommy admitted. "Kept thinking about the Henderson case." They'd spent the last month helping a disabled veteran named Sarah Henderson fight for benefits she'd been wrongly denied. Yesterday, they'd finally won. Full back pay, full benefits, an apology from the VA. "We should celebrate," Carmela said. "Actual celebration, not just coffee." "Spoke to Sarah this morning," Bear added. "She cried, happy tears, said she can finally afford her medications now." Marcus felt that familiar warmth in his chest. This was why they did it, not for glory or recognition. For moments like that phone call, when someone who'd been drowning finally got thrown a rope. Annie came over to take orders. Emma toddled behind her now, almost 3 years old, chattering about something only she understood. When she saw Marcus, she lit up. "Motorcycle Man. Hey there, little one." Emma climbed onto the stool next to him with the confidence of a child who'd never learned to fear the world yet. "Mama says you ride a motorcycle." "That's right." "Can I ride it?" "When you're older." "How much older?" "A lot older." She considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, I can wait." "Tea." Annie scooped her up. "Come on, troublemaker. Let these folks have their breakfast." But Emma was looking past Marcus now, toward the back booth where Devin sat. "Who's that man?" Everyone turned. Devin had been watching the interaction with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Longing, maybe. Or regret. "That's Devin," Annie said carefully. "He used to own this building." "Does he still own it?" "No, baby. We own it now. All of us who work here. Oh, Emma thought about this. Is he nice? The question hung in the air. Annie looked at Marcus, then at Tommy, like she needed help answering. Devin stood and walked over before anyone could respond. He crouched down to Emma's eye level, keeping a respectful distance. I'm trying to be nice, he said honestly. I wasn't very nice before, but I'm learning. Emma studied him with the brutal honesty of children. My mama says it's important to be nice. Your mama's right. Okay. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. She wriggled out of Annie's arms and ran back toward the kitchen, already distracted by something else. Devin stood. His eyes were wet. She's beautiful. Thank you, Annie said quietly. An awkward silence settled over the group. Tommy broke it by pulling out a chair at the counter. Sit down, Devin. You look like you're going to fall over. Devin sat, keeping space between himself and the others. Marcus noticed his hands were calloused now. Working hands. Tommy said I could start helping with outreach, Devin said. Talking to landlords who are considering evictions. Trying to find solutions before people lose their homes. That's good work, Carmela said. It's hard work. Most of them tell me to mind my own business. Some recognize my name and laugh in my face. I don't blame them. But some listen? Marcus asked. Some listen. Last week, I convinced a property owner to accept a payment plan instead of evicting a family. It's not much, but it's something. Bear pulled out his laptop and set it on the counter. Speaking of which, I've been tracking eviction rates in the county. They've dropped 11% in the last 6 months. Some of that might be seasonal. But the advocacy work is making a difference. Tommy ordered coffee and turned to Devin. The club voted last night. If you're still interested, you can start riding with us on community outreach, food drives, school supplies, that kind of thing. See how you handle being around people who still remember what you did. Devin's face went through several expressions at once: hope, fear, gratitude. I'm interested, thank you. Don't thank me yet. First event is Saturday. We're doing a supply drive for homeless veterans. You'll be carrying boxes, setting up tables. Getting yelled at by people who don't trust bikers. It's not glamorous. I don't need glamorous. I need to help. Tommy nodded. Be at the clubhouse at 6 a.m. Don't be late. They ate breakfast together, an unlikely group bound by circumstances and choices. Conversation drifted to easier topics. Bear's daughter had gotten into college. Carmela had started teaching self-defense classes for women. Axel was competing in an adaptive sports competition next month. Normal life continuing. The work never stopped, but neither did the living. When Marcus finished eating, he left cash on the counter and stood to leave. Devin stood too. Marcus, can I ask you something? Marcus waited. Does it get easier, making up for the harm you've caused? Marcus thought about the question. Thought about 14 years of sobriety, of service, of trying to be better than the man he'd been. No, he said honestly. It doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. Strong enough to carry the weight of what you've done and still move forward. Devin nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Thanks for being honest. Marcus walked outside into the spring morning. The sun was warm on his face. His Harley sat waiting, chrome gleaming, ready to carry him wherever he needed to go. He'd just thrown his leg over the seat when his phone buzzed. Tommy had sent a message to the club group chat. New case. Single mother being harassed by ex-husband violating restraining order. Police won't help. We ride Tuesday. Marcus typed back, I'll be there. The work never stopped. There was always another fight, another person who needed someone to stand with them when the system failed. That was the code. That was the choice. He started the engine and sat there for a moment, feeling the rumble through his body, watching the diner through the window. Annie was laughing at something Emma had said. Tommy and Carmela were deep in conversation. Bear was showing someone something on his laptop. Devin sat alone again, but he wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the interactions, studying how people connected, learning. Marcus thought about where he'd been 6 months ago. Standing in this same parking lot with coffee burning his face and rage in his chest. He thought about where Devin had been, arrogant and cruel and certain he'd face no consequences. Neither of them were those people anymore. Or maybe they were still those people, but also something more. Something built from the choice to be better than no worst moments. The road stretched ahead, gray asphalt cutting through green Montana landscape. Marcus eased the throttle and pulled out of the parking lot. The engine's growl was steady and sure. A sound that meant freedom and purpose, and the promise that no matter how many times you fell, you could always stand back up. He rode toward his shop, toward work that needed doing, toward a life that was simple and honest and earned through years of choosing right over easy. Behind him, the diner continued its morning rhythm. People eating, talking, living. The ordinary miracle of a day unfolding. And on Route 9, a lone motorcycle disappeared into the distance, carrying a man who'd learned that justice wasn't always dramatic or final. Sometimes it was just showing up, standing firm, waiting for the powerful to remember they were human too. The burn scar on Marcus's neck had faded to almost nothing now, but he touched it sometimes anyway, a reminder that pain could transform into purpose, that cruelty could be met with courage, that silence in the face of wrong was complicity, but action in the face of wrong was everything. The engine hummed, the road opened wide, and somewhere ahead, someone else needed help that no one else would give. Marcus would be there when they did. That was the code. That was the promise. That was enough.